like to welcome Ruth Williams along to her first executive, and hope you enjoy it as much as we all do, Ruth. And also Councillor Wood. Now he is being promoted to a portfolio holder. So we've got a good balance on the executive now. I think I've got apologies from Andrew Ledbetter. Although he's not a member of the committee, they are entitled to sit and to address the items. He did tell me he's coming back from North Devon and he may be late. I've not heard from Kevin. In the new format this evening, we've got a question from a member of the public. This is the first time we'll be doing this, Peter. So Mr. Peter Keasley will be asking a question, and you'll be the first one ever. So there you go. So we start off with any apologies. I've given a few, but I think we've got a full house here. Good, full house here today. Are you okay that we got the minutes of the 8th of October? You agreed I sign those as a true record?
Right.
Thank you. Declarations of interest, as we all know those. If any of you have any pecuniary interest in any of the items, you need to declare it and leave the room as appropriate. Item 4 is the local government. We do have part 2 items 16, 17 and 18, and obviously members of the public will be and the press will be asked to leave, and we will switch off to those people at home. And so our first one is, we've got a public question, and that question is from Peter Cleesby. If you'd like to come to the table, Peter, and ask your question, you will have an answer from portfolio holder Councillor Bob Fole will be, and you will be entitled to ask a supplementary, but it must be relevant to his reply. I know it's the Christmas season, there's a little bit of a latitude, but please try to keep to it if you can, Peter. Off you go.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose you could say I feel the hand of history on my shoulder or something like that. But anyway, the question is, why is the statement of community involvement for the Greater Exeter Strategic Plan still a draft more than 2.5 years after consultation on it ended, and when is it to be finalised?
Good evening, Peter. The short answer is in 6 months' time. The longer answer, if you like, is that the draft statement of community involvement, which sets out how the guest authorities intend to involve local residents, businesses and other organisations in the Greater Strategic Plan, was consulted on between the 27th of February and the 10th of April 2017. Consultation on the SCI took place alongside the Greater Exeter Strategic Plan issues consultation. Comments received during the consultation are available to view on the GEST website. The comments have been analysed and will form the final version of the Statement of Community, which we plan to publish at the same time as the GEST site options and draft policies consultation document in 6 months' time in June 2020.
Would you like to ask a supplementary?
If I may, and I hope it's relevant. Thank you for the answer. That means that the next opportunity the public will have to comment on the proposed plan is in June 2020, when you put out issues and options, as I understand it. This is really 3 years after the initial issues and options consultation. And bearing in mind that all the meetings listed in para 8.5 of the report, except the formal local planning authority meetings, are held in private, does the council consider that the process adopted has provided sufficient opportunity for real community engagement with this important work?
No, Peter, you know as well as I do, that wasn't based upon his answer. Well, I'm going to be okay, because that should have been the content of a separate question, in my view. Bob, if you can answer it, please do. If not, Peter,
okay,
we will get a written response to you on that. If you would email, if you're not satisfied with what Councillor Fole says, email me the question and I will get you the answer.
Peter, I think the crux of the issue is that any decisions reached by GASP have to be agreed by 4 separate local authorities. That means the wheels can take some time to turn. Now, we are lucky in Exeter that we have a stable, large majority Labour Party year on year. The other 3 local authorities within GASP have all undergone considerable turnover and change of hands in terms of leadership. So for some of them, it's a question of sort of going back 2 paces before it can go 1 step forward. So we are as fast as the slowest member, if you like. So while the system isn't necessarily perfect, there will be an opportunity in June for further consultation.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Thank you for coming. We now move on to item 6, which is move more physical activity strategy, build facilities, outline business case for Wonford Health and Wellbeing Centre. Before I ask Councillor Pearson, as the portfolio holder, to read the recommendations out, and then for James Bogue, who's deputising for Joe Yellen, to give us any supplementary detail, under Standing Order 44, Councillor Mitchell would like to make a statement. To clarify it, Councillor Michael, you come forward, you make your statement, and then that's it, you leave. Okay, thank you very much.
A short statement, even better.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Whilst welcoming this key community development, there are a number of points that we believe the committee need to discuss and resolve regarding the reports before you. Is the removal of the Wonford Community Centre from community management and placing it in the hands of a private operator as a part of any leisure contract compatible with the Council's commitment to asset-based community development? As a part of the community consultation process, were the community asked about the future ownership and operation of the new centre, and if they were, what was their response? In regard to transport provision, what are the intentions regarding the nature and size of any car parking at the centre? What views, if any, did those in the community have regarding car parking at the centre? In the view of the Council's commitment to a carbon neutral future and the already heavily congested local roads, what actions are being considered to mitigate the issues arising from increased interaction of the community within the new centre? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay. So over to you, Councillor Pearson, if you can move your recommendations, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the recommendation before us in this report is a recommendation that the Executive give approval to the Director for progressing the outlined business case for the new Health and Wellbeing Centre in Wonford to the design brief stage, to include point A, ongoing co-design with residents, the community and key stakeholders developing the ideas set out in the report into indicative sketches, layouts, designs, and building and running costs. B, development of Wonford Area Recreational Cycle Investment Plan, which is going to be really exciting. C, further work with Wonford Green Surgery partners to establish options for generating suitable capital receipts for the current Wonford Green Surgery site and principles around long-term affordable rent commitment and reimbursement from NHS SE. D, improvements to the Wonford playing pitches utilisation section 106 money set aside for the purpose, ensuring that these developments are aligned with the emerging priorities within the playing pit strategy and Football Association local plan. Just to elaborate on that slightly, on that point D, that's really important. The community have definitely voiced their desire to move forward with investment in that area, and we're keen to support them as a council. 2.2, it is recommended that the Executive endorse the inclusion of Wonford Village in the Liverpool Exeter Garden City programme. 2.3, it is recommended that the executive note the continued financial and professional support from Sport England, who have been amazing through this process, through the local delivery pilot for the engagement and co-design process. Just to touch a little on the reasons for the recommendations, and I think the reasons section is perhaps worth referring to for the members of the public. This is a process that's been in train since July 2019 and aims to co-design a facility that is a focal point for the community, and that's the important point. It's a focal point for the Wanford community. And Councillor Mitchell is obviously not entitled to ask questions, but in my response to, I think if there's anything missing from the report in terms of the detail that he would require, what I would say is that we're at an early stage and we've been rigorous engaging the community in this process. And that rigour doesn't mean presenting options to the community, it means genuinely asking the community what they want. And I think one of the things that they really want is trust between the council, their representatives, and we want their trust as well. And I don't think that trust is developed by the kind of statements and questions that Councillor Mitchell has made today, unfortunately. But there we go. Thanks.
Thank you. James Bogue, is there anything you want to add in relation to these recommendations?
I just wanted to once again thank Sport England for their continued external funding to help us through with the engagement process. A wide range of community and residents fed into the report, and there are 3 reports attached for further detail. Over 600 members of the local community attended various events and fed into the process, and we engaged over 15 stakeholders from primary care in terms of the future health elements of the centre. A local sounding board is being created, driven by local residents, and I'm delighted to say that they've agreed to continue to drive the future of the project forward beyond the decision this evening.
Okay, I'll open it up for discussion. Anybody want to say anything? Well, okay, what I will add is that Councillor Mitchell made a statement. You did previously issue a number of questions, and which is not what we do here. But what I'm going to do for you, not today, or the next day or so, I'll get you short answers to all those questions. Because, and hopefully you will see that as Councillor Pearson said, we're doing everything in order. We are consulting with the local people. No decisions have been made about car parks. We haven't got any plans. You have to wait, and it will all come out in good time, and there will be full public interaction. But I will get you, I've got that in the office, and I'll get you short questions to that. But and just to say, we are always available. You can always contact us when you want. So, those are the recommendations. Can I ask all those in favour? Good, so that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. We move on to item 7, which is the Exeter Grants Programme changes to the scheme of delegation. And I'm going to ask here Councillor Amal Hussain to take us through the recommendations, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to clarify that the new Exeter Grants Programme has been approved by Council in July 2019. The recommendations proposed today is focused on approving the delegation scheme itself. I will read the recommendations. That the Executive recommend to Council approve the following. Amend the scheme of delegation to delegate approval of grants to the Director of Communities in consultation with the portfolio holder for communities. The term of references for the operation of the grants panel with delegated authority to the proper officer to review and amend the terms of reference as necessary. And the decision to open an ad hoc strategic grant fund is delegated to the Director for Communities in consultation with the council leader and the portfolio holder for the communities. The main reason for the recommendations today is the fact that it is a new scheme that we are putting in operation, and there may be amendments as we go through the pilot year, and we need a delegated decision for making changes when and if necessary. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Amal. James Bogue, anything to add?
The only thing to add is the Exeter Grants Fund is open. I'm delighted to say that we've already had over a dozen applications through the process and some great feedback around the online process, and we welcome applications from local communities.
And can you remind me just what is the total budget for all these grants that we're allocating as a council?
So there's over £1 million being invested into our community grants and strategic services this year.
Thank you. I had forgotten that temporarily, that we were putting in over £1 million of our budget towards that. Excellent, good, and I hope those grants are dealt with speedily and supports our communities out there. So, you see the recommendations there. All those in favour of the recommendations? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. So I'd like to move on now to our next one, item 8, which is the council tax long-term empty premium for 2020 and 2021 financial years. Councillor Morse, to move the recommendations, please.
Okay, the recommendations for this are that the executive supports an increase in the council tax long-term empty premium from 100% to 200% from the 1st of April 2020 for properties empty for 5 years or more, and from 200% to 300% on the 1st of April 2021 for properties empty for 10 years or more. The executive also recommends to council the adoption of the increase in the council tax long-term empty premium from 100% to 200% from the 1st of April 2020 for properties empty for 5 years or more, and from 200 to 300% from the 1st of April 2021 for properties empty for 10 years or more. I think it's probably self-explanatory. I think it's all covered in that recommendation. At the moment, we have 78 empty homes in the city. There's 78 homes that are still empty despite very intensive work from our Empty Homes team, and I'd like to give them credit for what they've achieved. But at the moment, we have far too many people that are homeless in Exeter or are on waiting lists or don't have appropriate housing for us to sit with a conscience and not do more. So I think it's a recommendation that we should support so that we are able to offer more of an incentive to get those houses filled.
Thank you. Bindu.
Just a couple of points, if I may, Chair, by way of assurance to members. So it's very clear in the guidance that we can only apply this premium if there is clear evidence that these properties aren't up for either rental or for sale. And secondly, that officers will always assess each individual circumstance of that homeowner to ensure that we understand the situation that they're in before we look to take any further action. So for example, sometimes we might find those homes are empty because of family bereavement, sometimes because of other health issues. So just to assure members, we would always be mindful of that when considering each case.
Thank you. Anybody wants to make observations? Well, just to say, in case anybody thinks we're on some sort of taxing people here, it is a provision that we can do, and it's noticeable that in 2021 it's £3,568, and in 2021 to 22 anticipated 4,447. So this is not a tax take that we're doing. More importantly, when you reflect upon that there's 1.6 million people in this country on social housing waiting lists, and there are 200,000 properties standing empty on Exeter in England. I wish there was stand, we'd fill them pretty quick. It goes to show that this isn't the golden bullet that's going to sort everything in this country, but it would be a long step in bringing a lot of homes back into use for people. So those are the recommendations that we support this. Are we all in favour of those recommendations? All in favour, please show. Thank you, that's carried unanimously. Item 9, which is Council Tax Support Scheme 2020 to 2021. Councillor Morse.
Okay, the recommendation this time is that the Executive recommends to Council that the scheme for the current year continues for 2020 to 2021 without substantive changes, and that members note the work being commenced by officers to develop options for members' consideration for a simple banded scheme to be introduced from April 2021 at the earliest. Again, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, and it also notes in the report that as we move forward with any schemes for the following year, we will be working with a working group of councillors to ensure that we take into account all impacts and who may be affected by that, including the portfolio holder for equalities and the champion.
Okay, thank you. Bindu, well, I'd like you just to remind, because some people may be watching and say, well, what's all that about? I'd like you to tell us why we actually have to do this, and what's it in place of, and why we do this, and why we have to support low-income families. Can you explain, please?
Thank you, Chair. So the Local Council Tax Support Scheme is designed to support those families and households who aren't able to meet their council tax liability. So since 2013, that responsibility has been given to local government. It used to be a central government funded scheme. So at the original point in 2013, when local authorities were given the responsibility for the scheme, it was done with a 10% reduction in funding. So from then, every year since, Council is required to approve Exeter's Local Council Tax Support Scheme. So our current scheme means that every household has to pay at least 15% of their liability. But what we have available to us is hardship funds. So where we can identify that families aren't able, or households aren't able to meet that liability, we obviously will work to understand that and do what we can to support them, Chair.
Okay, so I help understand, this was changed in 2013, and whereby previously to that it was 100% funded. Am I correct in saying that? People got the council tax, and the Lib Dem and the Conservative government decided to make everybody pay at least 15%, but we had discretion.
The scheme that was developed locally was up to local discretion. Often what happens is that someone like Mr Hodgson will set a set of available funds, and from that members then have to develop a scheme within those available resources.
And just to remind me, we don't get no support from central government for that. We do that from within our own budget, is that correct?
So when the scheme...
Thank you, Chair. So when the scheme was originally started by the coalition government, we were given a ring-fenced grant that was reduced by 20% from the original grant that was provided for the previous council tax support scheme. That was then rolled up into our general formula grant, so you can't identify specific money for it. It just forms part of our funding settlement from the government.
But it is fair to say that that settlement is reducing every year.
So the settlement that we receive is reducing, and as you're aware, we'll be facing significant pressures owing to changes in that in the near future. I think that the key thing to focus on, when the scheme was introduced, the grant was reduced by 20%, and then it was rolled into our general fund. So we were given less funding from government to deliver a council tax support scheme. We had the discretion to use other resources to top that up.
Okay, thank you. I think I've drawn that one out enough. All those in favour, I think it's an important point for people to understand that how we are spending our money, and not supported by government necessarily. All those in favour of the recommendation, please show. That's agreed unanimously. Thank you. And we move on now to item 10, approval of procurement strategy. And we have Councillor Michael Mitchell to speak under Standing Order 44. Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Again, a short statement. Whilst the policy documentation sets out the broad framework in regard to future procurement policy, should not reference be made within the documentation to extra city councils and other councils in the partnership having declared climate emergencies and their commitment to be carbon neutral by 2030, cross-reference to page 237 in the documentation. And secondly, the policyholder for climate and culture has previously indicated that the procurement policy will maintain definite commitment to ending single-use plastics. Will the policy make explicit environmental commitments such as this? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your statement. Okay, and so this is Councillor Wood to read the recommendations, please.
Thank you, Chair. The recommendations are that the Executive recommends to the Council the adoption of the Devon District Procurement Strategy 2019 to 2022. This is the third iteration of that strategy. Secondly, that the Executive establish any Council-specific priorities or objectives which need to be incorporated into the strategy jointly across the partnership or individually. And I believe that's where questions such as were raised by Councillor Mitchell will be picked up. Our own individual strategies and priorities can be included. Thank you.
Chanel, you've joined us. Would you like to add anything to this?
Just that I think on the consideration around carbon neutral and including that in the strategy, that actually gets picked up on a case-by-case basis, defined by each contract, depending on the nature and the scope of the contract. We consider that on a case-by-case basis through our commercial endorsement process. So whilst it's not in the overarching strategy document, it does form part of our kind of policies and procedures in terms of carrying out the procurement.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to say anything? Well, just to add in again, Councillor Mitchell, I can get you a better written response to that emailed question you said. I'm not setting myself a precedent here for going forward, but of course, much you say about the Council's corporate strategy, and we are going to be looking at that in any event. And we need to do that because the strategy was identified for 2018 to 2021, and we will be updating that in view of the Council declaring a climate emergency. And a lot more, I suppose, is going to depend on what happens within the next 3 days, I suppose. And the government of whichever colour is going to come in and who's actually committed to actually dealing with the word emergency and whether or not, because as you know, our budget for climate emergency at this moment in time is zero, and we haven't got it. And you will hopefully make yourself available to a budget briefing that David Hodgson will be doing on the 18th of it, and you'll have a look at that, and if you can tell me how we can squeeze out, I'd be listen to what people have got to say. But we'll get you that, Councillor Mitchell. Is there anybody else want to make a contribution on this topic? No? So you see the recommendations there. All those in favour? And that's unanimous. So we move on then to item 11, and this is for you, David Hodgson, which is the General Fund Capital Monitoring.
Thank you, Chair. It's often noted that I don't provide you with much good news in my reports, but I'm pleased to say over the next 4 reports I'm going to give you relatively good news when looking at the budgets for this financial year. So if we take the capital monitoring first, I'd like to note that there's no decisions required from you in this report. We're not seeking any further funding at this stage, but I would like to draw your attention to the fact on page 263, my apologies, that we've spent £19.1 million of the programme after 6 months, which equates to 31% of the capital programme. And if you compare that with last year, where we were at 19%, you can see that we've had a significant improvement in the spend of the capital project. Obviously, that's down to the major projects now being underway, and I think that's probably the highest level I've ever reported at this stage. I'd also like to draw members' attentions on page 265 to the two achievements: Pinhoe Station Road play area and the acquisition of a commercial property, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, David. Any questions for David Hodgson there? Just on page 265, those are two important bits. The Pinhoe Station Road play area is very important, I think, to the community in Pinhoe, and that is to be welcomed. And the purchase of commercial property, and I think that was a necessary step, which is there. And which tells us that the net annual income to the council is 591,000 and the cost of 335 per annum. I think it's very, very important, and that brings an important income into the council to allow us to carry on in providing services. So there's nothing else on that point. All those in favour of that recommendation, please show. Carried unanimously. And so item 12, which is the overview of the general fund revenue budget. David again.
Thank you, Chair. The overview report for 6 months again. There's only a small request for supplementary budgets, £52,000. None of those impacting on the general fund. They're both either coming from earmark reserves or from Section 106 funds. And again, I'm pleased to say that we're projecting a small reduction in the amount we're expecting to take from the working balance over the rest of the financial year, and the projected working balance will stand at 3.75 million, so comfortably above our minimum level of reserves. And again, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, David. Anybody would like to make a contribution, ask a question? No? Okay, those are the recommendations. All those in favour of the recommendations, please show. Thank you, that's carried unanimously. We'll now move on to item 13, which is the Housing Revenue Account Budget Monitoring Report for the second quarter. David.
Thank you, Chair. So, in terms of the HRA at the 6 month, for the 6 month period, again, we're projecting a reduction in the proposed take from the working balance of the housing revenue account. Quite a significant reduction, down by £919,000. This is predominantly due to a reduction in the repair and maintenance programme, partly because of better prices delivered under procurement, and partly because of time taken to do the procurements properly has led to some small delays. We expect those delays to be caught up during the next financial year, so the money will be rolled over into then. But again, it's a positive situation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. In the absence of any indication for a question or contribution, all those in favour of the recommendation, please show. That's carried unanimously, thank you. Item 14 is the Treasury Management Report half-year update.
Thank you, Chair. Again, there's no recommendations or decisions for you to take in this report. This is a statutory report that we're required to produce. 6 month projection on Treasury Management. Members will know that we have recently taken out long-term borrowing, £49.5 million, to cover the financial needs of the council going forward. If we turn to page 311, you'll see the projected interest for the year is £77,000 against a budget of £216,000. Now, partly that represents the benefit we got from getting lower interest rates than we were budgeting for. So that was a really positive impact on the council, further heightened by the fact that the government 2 weeks later increased the PWLB amount. So members can see from the report the level of borrowing we have outstanding and the range of deposits that we have where we're investing the money. And again, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, there's quite a bit of information on there. We're asked to note this report if there's no questions. You agree we note the report? All those in favour? Okay, that's unanimous, thank you. So we move on now to item 15, and this is the revised local development scheme. Councillor Bob Fole.
The executive agreed the proposed scope and timetable for the guest development delivery plan, code for sustainable homes (SPD) and planning obligations (SPD) as detailed in this report and summarised in Appendix A.
Okay, it's about the guests again. Any contribution? No?
I welcome the work that's going on here to have the guests come back into play again, because I think it's a very important piece of work for us going forward when we're looking at housing and infrastructure and development across the county. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Yes, it is an important piece of work. It's been going on a long time, as it's been pointed out to us. I'd like to thank our officers who's been involved in moving this along, and I know now all the other authorities have basically approved it. It's quite ironic that we're the last ones, seeing we were the first ones to go on, but that's just about how the meetings are timetabled. So you see that recommendation there. All those in favour, please show. Okay, that's agreed unanimously. Thank you very much. Well, that comes to the end of the formal public session. It's for me to wish everybody Merry Christmas, and I hope Santa brings everything you want, maybe a bit earlier, in a couple of days' time. Wish you all a happy new year, and that's all from us, and we'll move into part 2 now. Thank you.